last 10 years, in summary, has been a period of unprecedented enforcement in terms of the number of investigations that have started, the number of people who have gone to jail, and the number of corporate enforcement actions, and the amount of the fines that have been imposed. But why? What has been the motivating factors for what's happened over the last 10 years? And I think one of the biggest things, perhaps the biggest single factor, is international cooperation. There has been a growing consensus during the last 10 years at least that foreign bribery should end. And countries are working together, often with the United States, to both end domestic corruption, but also to cooperate in the field of foreign corruption. And part of that has been motivated by a series of international treaties and conventions. In my personal opinion is that the OECD Anti-Bribery Convention is the most important of that. As I mentioned back in 1995, when I first encountered the FCPA, the United States was the only country in the world that had a foreign bribery prohibition. And from the beginning, U.S. businesses complained that this was not fair because it was putting them on an unequal competitive footing with their foreign competitors. And in the late 80s, there was a sense of Congress. Congress didn't change the law, but said to the administration, you should negotiate a treaty with our major trading partners so that they also adopt an FCPA-like statute so American businesses can compete more equally in the foreign marketplace. And that's what led to the OECD Anti-Bribery Convention. And by 1999, most of the U.S.'s major international business partners had signed on to the OECD Anti-Bribery Convention. It's important for a number of reasons. And perhaps the most important reason is the Mutual Legal Assistance Treaty process, also known as the MLAT process. Now, under MLATs, countries agree that they will help each other prosecute crimes. But one important limitation of that process is, in almost all MLATs, there is a dual reciprocity requirement, which means that if country A is asked to help country B prosecute a crime, that activity has to be a crime in both countries. And before the OECD Convention, the U.S. could not avail itself of the MLATs to investigate FCPA violations because foreign bribery was not illegal in the other countries. So one of the things that happened with the OECD Convention is it required all the member parties to enact an FCPA-like statute, and it made that cooperation possible under those mutual legal assistance treaties. The other thing that happens with the OECD is it meets 4 times a year in Paris. The member states do. I was part of that while I was at DOJ. And what happens is, like any other human interactions, people sit down together and they get to know each other. So we sit down with the prosecutors from Brazil and Argentina and the UK and Germany, and we get to know them on a personal basis. And that matters a lot, because when you're especially in law enforcement, you're very concerned about what's going to happen with the evidence that you have. Is somebody going to use it for a bad purpose? Is it going to be leaked to the media? And you develop these relationships where you start to trust people and get to know that they have similar interests in you. And so when there is an issue in Brazil, Brazil knows who to contact in the United States to help get information, and vice versa. And there's a trust there. And so that's a very important part of it. The other important part of it is that there's a very rigorous peer review process where 2 countries will go into a 3rd country and really look behind the numbers and the laws and see whether that 3rd country is living up to its expectations under the Anti-Bribery Convention. And it results in some very, very harsh reports for countries that are not doing what they're supposed to be doing. And that has led, we'll talk about it in the Brazilian context, but that has led to some very major changes in domestic anti-corruption law and enforcement. The most prominent one until the Clean Companies Act in Brazil was probably the UK Bribery Act, which was a direct result of OECD peer review criticism of the UK for having an inadequate law and inadequate enforcement. So the OECD has really driven, I think, in a major way, the anti-corruption initiatives and the FCPA enforcement over the last decade.